right, so hi everyone. Welcome back to Imagine After Hours virtual series. You may have noticed that we've taken a bit of a break recently. We are now focusing on creating in-person events for people with mental illness, as well as friends, family, and support network here in Victoria. So we have a really amazing lineup of events coming up. February 20th, we'll be hosting a movie night with Bruce Saunders of Movie Monday. On March 20th, we'll be doing a music and poetry evening with local musicians in the community. And on the April 24th, we'll be bringing in comedians from Vancouver who are part of the Stand Up for Mental Health comedy group. So all of our events are free. They are being hosted by the Victoria Event Centre, which is downtown at 1415 Broad Street. And we'll be feeding you. So you can come, you can enjoy a snack, refreshments, and some non-alcoholic drinks. And yeah, everyone's welcome. So I hope to see you there. You're welcome to drop in on the evening of, but you can also get in touch with me to register in advance. My email is psrcollaborative@gmail.com. And for more information about our events and to see our schedule, you can check out our website at www.psrcollaborative.com. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our guest today. This is Brecken Sales. Brecken is a third-year student at UVic. She is studying biology and psychology. She's also a member of the Students Against Stigma Club and a contributor to their research and their Head and Heart podcast. So Brecken, do you want to tell me a little bit more about the UVic Students Against Stigma Club?
I would love to, and thank you for having me. UVic Students Above Stigma is a group that aims to eradicate stigma against psychiatric illness by exposing people to science and accredited information. We use different platforms, so we use Instagram, Facebook, we have a website, a podcast, also our research blog, and then sometimes we hold events to kind of get people to mingle and, talk about eradicating stigma.
You're interested in eating disorders specifically. Is that part of the undergrad that you're doing right now?
Right now, my undergrad is more focused on kind of general biology and psychology. So learning about kind of how the brain works, how we think about things, how that influences behaviors. My interest in eating disorders kind of came from knowing people with lived experience. And once I started learning about them, I thought it was really interesting how varied they are and how misunderstood they are, although they seem to be very pervasive in our society.
First of all, what is an eating disorder and how does that tie in with mental health?
Yeah, so an eating disorder, I think in the most broad sense, is any major disturbance in eating or feeding behaviors. That's kind of what the DSM defines. And like I said earlier, a lot of people have what we call disordered eating. So their eating habits aren't necessarily intuitive, a little bit of food restriction, a little bit of over-exercise, but when it becomes an eating disorder is when it kind of becomes pervasive. And so it becomes an individual's main focus, and it tends to take a lot away from social life, work, daily functioning. That's when things kind of become problematic, and we would call it an eating disorder. There are many different kinds of eating disorders. There are eating disorders that we think of like anorexia and bulimia. There's binge eating disorder, which is characterized by binge eating. And then there are also eating disorders that are more focused on nutrition, that are more focused on feeding behaviors. And eating disorders occur really often with anxiety disorders, depressive disorders. We see it a lot with borderline personality disorder. And actually not even a mental health condition, but neurodevelopmental. Things like pica and avoidant restrictive food intake disorder are really tied to autism. So there is a big mental health component to those. And like I said, when there's a huge disturbance in eating, you can also see mental health decline when things with food and body start to take over. So there's definitely a huge tie to that.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the most common myths and stigmas that are associated with eating disorders?
Yeah, I think there are a lot, and I'm going to touch on three that are pretty significant. One of the biggest misconceptions is that eating disorders are a weight disorder and that you have to be emaciated to have an eating disorder. While it's true that only one eating disorder has a weight component, it doesn't really mean a lot because people at any size can have any eating disorder. And something that goes along with that is people tend to think the more underweight you are or emaciated you are, the more ill you are, which is definitely not true. Like studies have shown that people can be at a higher weight or in a larger body and have serious physical complications and psychological complications, and just as serious as someone who maybe fits the typical profile that one might think of when you think of eating disorder. Another myth is that boys don't get eating disorders, which also is not true. People of any gender can get any eating disorder. And I like to say that eating disorders can affect anybody of any parameter, so they don't discriminate. And it's just not true that boys don't get eating disorders. Another thing that people tend to think is that eating disorders are a choice. Like other mental illnesses, they're not a choice. People don't just choose to develop eating disorders, and people can't just fix themselves by eating normally. There's a long process of refeeding and like you guys stand for, psychosocial rehabilitation. That's really important to actually helping someone with an eating disorder. So it's not a food disorder.
And so you mentioned that like there is actually quite a high prevalence of some of these types of eating disorders in our society. Do you have numbers for that?
I do, yeah. So I just want to say that researching the numbers was actually quite difficult, and there is very little research that's been done in Canada about exact numbers. So as of 2016, approximately 1 million people met the criteria for any eating disorder at that time. Older research from 2012 suggests that prevalence rates, like point prevalence rates, are between 2.2 to 4.6%. So that's a fairly high percentage of people. And these numbers are believed to be on the rise, especially with COVID. And although numbers specifics aren't available from COVID, especially not in BC, Ontario hospitals were reporting significantly higher numbers of hospitalizations. So we can say that trend probably followed in BC and in Canada. Other countries also reported this, so it's safe to say that COVID did some damage.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I think I wanted to share just some things that people have told me and I've heard other eating disorder sufferers learn about, is that it's important to recognize that not everyone with an eating disorder is the same person, and not every eating disorder is the same. So methods that work for one person don't necessarily work for another. And just because one treatment works for somebody doesn't make their illness more valid or worse or more severe. There's a really common phenomenon where people with eating disorders are not able to see how unwell they are. And so there's a drive to become more unwell, which is obviously not super conducive to recovery. And so understanding and helping them understand that you don't have to compete is really important, and understanding that everyone's an individual and individuals need specific interventions. Another thing that is very important, I think, is just saying like recovery is possible. It's hard, but it's very possible. And there are lots of people out there who want to support people to recover and believe in full recovery.
Do you have any resources that are specific to eating disorder recovery through your club, maybe nonprofits or like various support groups, or anything that people who are watching this might want to check out?
Yeah, for sure. There is one in Victoria, especially Vancouver Island Voices for EDs. They're called VIVED. They do a weekly support group on Mondays. It's like a process dialogue group, I believe. And they have had an instrumental role in advocating for island services, so island eating disorder services. There's also Looking Glass BC. They run, they have 3 programs right now. They have personal recovery space. So it's basically a forum where you write and then volunteers respond, and you can it's like a journal that talks back. That's how they explain it. There's also, through Looking Glass, chats where you can just chat with peers who are having struggles with eating disorders, and it's a pro-recovery space. So you can share your wins, share your struggles to a certain extent, and then get kind of some feedback and some support. They also have a hand-in-hand program where you are matched with a mentor who is recovered or has experience, and they kind of chat with you about things that are coming up. And it's very similar to the recovery space, except it's face-to-face or on Zoom. And then there's also residential care that's through PHSA, that's affiliated with Looking Glass. And then if we're thinking more nationally, there is NEDIC, NEDIC, and it's kind of an advocacy group and an information group for all of Canada. So they kind of talk about what to look out for, how to get treatment in different provinces. And it's less comprehensive for each province, but it's really good as a starting base to learn more about eating disorders.
Great. Yeah, those are all really good resources. Any final thoughts before we...
No, thanks for letting me ramble about that.
That was really wonderful. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate your time and coming on here today.